Hello, friends, and thank you for supporting This Day in Jack Benny. I'm John Henderson. Today, Jack Benny and then Rochester are guests on Bill Stern's Sports Newsreel.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? This is Bill Stern with up-to-date news on the national picture in the world of sports. Today, an ever-growing enthusiasm for sports in general is reaching an all-time high. Surveys show that more than ever before, people are playing tennis and golf, going horseback riding, trap and skeet shooting, swimming, playing badminton, flying, hunting, skating, in fact, participating in all of the recreational sports.
Now, it's supposed to be a sports show, but it's only very loosely connected to sports. And each episode had a special guest. In this case, Jack Benny from the December 28, 1945 episode, and Eddie Rochester Anderson from the June 7th, 1946 episode. In it, they mention the episode where Jack Benny has Joe Louis, the boxer, as a special guest.
Joe, it was certainly nice of you to drop in, and I'll see you right after the broadcast.
Just a minute. I come in to be a comedian. I want to tell a joke.
Now, why don't you leave the comedy to me? After all, it took me 25 years to become a comedian. It's the same as fighting. Now, how long did it take you to become a champion?
10 seconds.
And they talk about Rochester's racehorse.
Rochester, if you're calling about getting time off to go to the Kentucky Derby, the answer is no.
Oh, I forgot all about the Derby. That was just a silly whim of mine.
Good.
But I was wondering, boss, my sister Bedelia is getting married, and if it's all right with you, I'd like to attend the ceremony.
Getting married, eh? Where does your sister live?
Louisville.
Say, I wonder if Rochester's horse has got a chance.
Well, it's not a sure thing, but who knows about horse races?
Yeah, who knows?
The show's sort of a precursor to Paul Harvey, where it's an interesting story with a bit of a twist at the end. And if you don't know Paul Harvey, stay tuned after the episode for a little bonus. Bill Stern wasn't too worried about whether the stories were true or not. Some stories were based on fact, some were exaggerated, and others were what they call legend. So lather up some Colgate shave cream and enjoy the show.
Colgate, Colgate presents Bill Stern with the Colgate Shave Cream Sports Newsreel. Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, is on the air. Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, with stories rare. Take his advice and you'll look keen. You'll get a shave that's smooth and clean. You'll be a Colgate brushless fan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bill Stern broadcasting from Hollywood, California tonight. And our guest here in Hollywood is one of America's most famous radio stars, Jack Benny. But first, real one. He's been a champ longer than any man in sports history. So let's salute the great king of the billiard cue, Willie Hoppy.
Okay, Bill, and here's the way Willie Hoppy salutes Colgate Brushless, the shave cream of champions. He writes, I'm a Colgate Brushless booster from way back. Why, I just wouldn't feel in form if I didn't have Colgate Brushless to keep my somewhat tender face from being irritated. No kidding, Bill. Colgate Brushless lets me shave smooth as a cue ball, but leaves my face feeling refreshed. I guess that's because it doesn't dry out on my skin. Signed, Willie Hoppy.
Now, isn't that a sweet picture of a shave with Colgate Brushless, the shave cream of champions? A light, fluffy cream. It keeps moist clear through your shave. Takes the fight out of wiry whiskers so your razor can shear them off close and clean. You can chalk up no snag, no pull, no after irritation to this great brushless shave cream. And because it's not gummy or greasy, it rinses off your face and your razor in a flash. What's more, if Colgate Brushless doesn't convince you completely, just send the top of the carton to me, Bill Stern, care of Colgate, Jersey City, Zone 2, New Jersey, and I'll see that you get double your money back. Save money. Buy the big 9-ounce economy-sized jar tonight. Reel 2. Colgate's camera close-up of Jack Benny. Tonight we're broadcasting from Hollywood, and he's one of the most famous stars in Hollywood. His radio program on Sunday evenings is one of America's most famous radio shows, and here he is in person, Jack Benny.
Hello again. This is Jack Benny talking. And, Bill, I want to thank you for inviting me on your program.
Well, you're welcome, Jack. But why did you have to why did you want to be on my program?
Well, it was a natural thing, Bill. You see, I've always been very active in sports.
You?
Certainly. Football, baseball, boxing, tennis, basketball, track, all those things. Of course, as much as I enjoy them, I've had to give them up. I'm almost 37, you know.
Now, wait a minute, Jack. I'm 37. Look at me.
Well, maybe you didn't take care of yourself.
Maybe, but getting back to sports, have you given up all forms of sports, Jack?
Well, no, Bill, not everything. There's still one sport I indulge in quite frequently.
Really? What is it?
Well, I like to stand on the corner of Sunset and Vine and go...
Jack, that's not bad. Have you picked up anything?
Yes, 2 poodles, 3 St. Bernards, and a traffic cop. But seriously, Bill, I do swim a little. You know, I have a pool in my backyard.
Well, in this weather, who hasn't? Anyway, Jack...
Been here a few days.
I know you're still interested in sports, because a few weeks ago you had Joe Lewis on your program.
Yes, Bill, I did have Lewis on my show, and he gave me some pointers on boxing.
Yes, Joe told me about that. He also mentioned that you had beautiful muscles.
Well, yes, I hate to say so, but I have.
Come here, Jack. Let me feel those muscles.
Well, I wish you'd let me know earlier. I would have worn them to the broadcast.
Well, next time I'll call you beforehand. You know, Jack, we've been kidding around, but I want you to know that I've talked to a lot of servicemen who've come back from overseas, and they all tell me what a wonderful job you did entertaining our troops.
Thanks, Bill, and as we come to the close of this year, the first peacetime New Year in 5 years, I, like everyone else, of course, am thankful for the victory and the peace. I'm also grateful that I was one of those asked to serve in the field of entertainment during the war. I know the theatrical world will always be ready, but I hope it won't be necessary again.
You're so right, Jack Benny. But don't go away, Jack. I want you back later in this program. And ladies and gentlemen, that speech by Jack Benny reminds me that this year is coming to a close. So tonight, let's look back and review the outstanding sports stories of this year. Memories of stories that made this year's sports history. Let's begin with the profile of Jack Chevney. Jack Chevney was one of the greatest football players to ever play for Notre Dame. But after graduation, Jack Chevney left Notre Dame to become the head football coach at the University of Texas. And at Texas, Jack Chevney coached a Texas team that beat his former alma mater, Notre Dame. They even gave Jack Chevney a gold fountain pen that bore an inscription which read, "Presented to Jack Chevney, a Notre Dame man who beat Notre Dame." When this war broke out, Jack Chevney joined the Marines. And as a Marine in this war, he gave his life at Iwo Jima when a Japanese bullet killed him. But the end of this story took place this year aboard the USS Missouri, when the Japanese officials came aboard to sign the official surrender document ending this war. For just as the Japanese official was about to sign Japan's surrender, someone noticed the fountain pen that this Japanese official was using. That fountain pen was Jack Chevney's gold fountain pen, stolen from his dead body at Iwo Jima, and it still bore the inscription, "To Jack Chevney, a Notre Dame man who beat Notre Dame." Yeah, that was one great sports memory of 1945, but there were others. Do you remember the story we called The Portrait of a Boxing Team? This was the story of a boxing team, a great boxing team. They were champions, except that they were dirty fighters. They fought dirty. They used foul tactics, anything to win a fight. In fact, they became so dirty that in one fight, they killed a man. And then they were charged with murder. But on the day that they were found guilty, the judge allowed them to go free. This was because of political influence, for you see, this all happened back in Germany. And those dirty prize fighters were the first Nazi party, headed by Adolf Hitler. But there were other great memories of sports events that reached the climax this past year. For instance, do you remember the profile of a Frenchman? This was the story of a Frenchman who gave one of the world's most lavish dinner parties. This huge dinner party cost this Frenchman over $100,000. And the guest of honor at this Frenchman's dinner party was a horse named Avion, a great racehorse that this Frenchman had just bought. Maybe you'd like to know who this Frenchman was. He was the former dictator of France, Pierre Laval. Pierre Laval, who was killed this past year, killed as a traitor to France. And after he was killed, they carted his body away to the burial grounds. And the horse that pulled his body to his grave was the very same horse for which he'd once given the world's most expensive dinner party. Now the memories of this year's sports stories are coming back. Memories that on this last broadcast of this year we must remember, such as the portrait of a love story. This was the story of a girl named Lisa and a boy named Joseph. They lived in Vienna, and they were very, very much in love. Joseph was a soccer player, a good soccer player, and Lisa began to go with him to the soccer games. She became the official scorer of his Viennese soccer team. The years passed after that, and Adolf Hitler came into power. It was then that Lisa was ordered arrested. But all they found on her was a notebook which she said was filled with official soccer scores. And because she was the official soccer scorer, the Germans let her go to bring her notebook back to the Allies. For in that notebook, there weren't really soccer scores. No, those figures were the formula which gave the United States the atomic bomb. We've just about finished reviewing the best sports memories that took place in this passing year, but we must not forget a story that we call The Profile of a Rivalry. This was the story of a rivalry between two men. One was nicknamed Ben, the other was nicknamed Matty. These two were rivals in skiing, in racing, in boxing. Always it was Matty who beat Ben. This infuriated Ben so much that he vowed that somehow he'd get Matty, and he did get him. But one day, Ben caused Matty to lose his life. For Ben had Matty murdered. However, when Matty died, Matty's son swore that someday he'd avenge his father's death. And this year, he did. For he killed Ben, just as Ben had killed his father. And so this year saw the end of a rivalry between these two men. A rivalry that began in sports and ended in the death for both men. Maybe you'd like to know who these two men were. Matty was the famous Italian socialist leader, Giacomo Matteotti, while Ben was the dictator of Italy, Benito Mussolini. It was Mussolini who murdered Matteotti, only in turn to be murdered by Matteotti's son. We've reviewed the great sports memories of this passing year on this last program of this year, but there's one more story, a story we called The Portrait of a Sportsman. This was the story of an athlete. He played baseball, he played football, he rode horseback, he was a great swimmer, he loved sports, and then at the very peak of his career, he was struck down. He became paralyzed. But he refused to quit. And he finally came back. He came back to become the President of the United States, for his name was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He didn't become a champion in any sport, and yet he was the greatest champion that sports have ever had. And this year when he died, I couldn't help remembering a simple inscription that's over the Arlington Military Cemetery, where America's war heroes are buried. And I think this inscription meant for them applies equally well to him, for it says, "Sleep well, soldier. You are not forgotten." Profile of this passing year. Reel 3. A great star will be back in a moment, Mr. Jack Benny. But first...
You don't have to wonder why we call Colgate Brushless the shave cream of champions. I'll tell you. It's the chosen shave cream of famous champs in all branches of sport. And second, it gives champion shaving performance, especially to you men with tough beards and sensitive skin. It stays moist and active, clear to the end. It tames those tough whiskers, makes them act like fuzz. So if you're looking for smooth, close, clean shaving with no after irritation, then, brother, you'll find it in Colgate Brushless, the shave cream of champions. Ask for Colgate Brushless shave cream in the big 9-ounce jar tonight. Now back to Bill Stern.
Reel 4. Colgate's Candid Camera catches the story behind the story. Ladies and gentlemen, for tonight's story behind the story, here again is one of America's most famous radio stars, Jack Benny.
Bill, I think with the new year coming, there's one story you forgot, and it's a New Year's story. It's the story of a youngster named Robert Burns who came to live with an elderly man in Scotland. These two became great friends, for the elderly man had once been the bare-knuckle boxing champion of Scotland, and young Robert Burns wanted to be a boxer. But one New Year's Eve, the older man was burned to death in a tragic fire. Young Robert Burns was heartbroken over the loss of his old friend, the prize fighter, and with no one left to teach him boxing, Robert Burns gave it up and became a writer. One of the first things he wrote was a poem that's been set to music. This poem has become the most famous New Year's Eve poem ever written. And it was written in honor of his old friend, the prize fighter, who died on New Year's Eve. For now you know why Robert Burns wrote, "Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old lang syne?"
Thank you, Jack Benny. And that's the 3-0 mark for tonight.
Jack Benny appeared on this program tonight, courtesy of the American Tobacco Company, makers of Lucky Strike cigarettes.
Colgate, Colgate presents Bill Stern with the Colgate Shave Cream Sports Newsreel. Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, is on the air. Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, with stories rare. Take his advice and you'll look keen. You'll get a shave that's smooth and clean. You'll be a Colgate brushless fan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bill Stern bringing you the 344th edition of the Colgate Shave Cream Sports Newsreel, featuring strange and fantastic stories. Some that are legends, others mere hearsay, but also interesting. We'd like to pass them along to you. Our special guest tonight is the famous comedian from the Jack Benny Show, Rochester. But before we introduce Rochester in person, let's begin with Reel 1, Profile of Niagara Falls. Did you ever know that there was a strange sports story behind Niagara Falls? A sports story that began many years ago. For many years ago, there lived a great swimmer by the name of Matthew Webb. Matthew Webb was an Englishman, and he was the first man to ever swim the English Channel. And by swimming that English Channel, Matthew Webb attracted so much attention that he was brought to America to try and swim the Niagara River at the foot of Niagara Falls. But he did not do it. Instead, in trying to swim this whirlpool that forms the Niagara River, Matthew Webb was drowned. The jinx of Niagara Falls had begun. Several years later, in 1902, the most famous baseball player in America that year was a man named Ed Delahanty. Ed Delahanty played for the Washington Senators until one day his body was mysteriously found floating face downward in the Niagara River at the foot of Niagara Falls. To this day, one of the greatest mystery in sports is why Ed Delahanty, the most famous baseball player in America, should be found dead at the foot of Niagara Falls. But perhaps the strangest story of Niagara Falls came the following year, when a famous American actress, an actress named Maud Willard, decided to try and go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. She climbed into this barrel and, taking a friend with her in the barrel, she and her friend were pushed over Niagara Falls. 5 hours later, when the police dragged that barrel out of the whirlpool at the bottom of Niagara Falls, Maud Willard was dead. But that friend that she had taken with her in the barrel was still alive. That friend in the barrel, according to the story, was named Dawson, Bull Dawson. And Bull Dawson became famous because he had gone over Niagara Falls in a barrel, and he had lived. After a while, however, people no longer remembered that Bull Dawson had gone over Niagara Falls, and eventually he went back to his home in Canada. For a while, Bull Dawson was forgotten. One day, in the small Canadian town of Calvert, where he lived, he again made the headlines when he went out hunting. And in digging into the ground, he accidentally discovered some queer-looking stones. Bull Dawson didn't know what he'd found, but some men who were hunting with him knew. They knew that it was gold, and it was gold. For Bull Dawson had accidentally uncovered a gold mine that has produced over $100 million in gold, and is Canada's second most famous gold mine, and is named the Dawson Mine because it was discovered by Bull Dawson. Not only that, but this gold mine made his town so famous that they changed its name from Calvert to Dawson in honor of Bull Dawson. Certainly, nobody could do more for a town than Bull Dawson had done. He had found the famous Dawson gold mine, and because of this, he'd been responsible for the town changing its name to his name. But strangely enough, as the years went by, despite these honors, Bull Dawson began to change. He began getting quarrelsome and mean, and then one night, he was caught stealing. But the man who caught him stealing never lived to tell about it, for Bull Dawson turned on him and killed him. Now Bull Dawson was wanted for murder, and he was finally caught. However, they didn't send Bull Dawson to prison because of what he'd done for the town, but because he was a killer. Bull Dawson was ordered to leave town, and he had to leave town, the very town that was named after him, and he was never seen again. That's the strange story as told to me of Bull Dawson. Bull Dawson, who first attracted fame by going over Niagara Falls in a barrel, and who lived to discover one of the world's most fabulous gold mines, and yet who, because he was a killer, had to leave the very town that was named after him. Oh, yeah. There's one more thing. Bull Dawson wasn't a man. He was a dog. A bulldog. Reel 2. Just a moment, we'll present our special guest in person, Eddie Rochester Anderson, the famous Rochester of the Jack Benny radio program. But first, here is Charles F. McCarthy.
Colgate Brushless is truly the shave cream of champions. You'll see why first time you introduce your face to this light, fluffy cream. The toughest whiskers strike out when Colgate Brushless is in their pitching. In record time, it hangs up a winning score for quick, slick, no-pull performance. And no after-irritation. What comfort for fellows with sensitive skin. Now, Sunday, June 16th is Father's Day. What better time to introduce Dad to Colgate Brushless Shave Cream? The 9-ounce jumbo jar makes a swell gift and will give Dad pleasure every morning for a long time to come. And now to Bill Stern and Rochester.
Reel 5, Colgate's camera close-up of the comedy star of the Jack Benny Show, Eddie Anderson, far better known as Rochester. You've all heard Rochester on the Jack Benny program. Now meet him in person, Jack Benny's valet, Rochester.
Boy, what a relief to be on a show where I get paid.
Wait a minute, Rochester. This is a sports show, and just what do you know about sports?
Well, in blackjack, you deal 2 cards, in poker is 5, and in Harlem badminton...
You're one of the most famous comedians on the air, Rochester. Everybody hears each week as Jack Benny's valet. But could we be serious tonight?
Okay, Bill.
All right, on the level, I understand that you own a racing stable.
I do, Bill. I own a stable of 6 racehorses. In fact, I ran one of my horses in the 1943 Kentucky Derby.
And where did it finish?
I like boating, and in fact, I have a small cruiser.
Recently, didn't you get lost at sea, and didn't the Coast Guard have to come out and rescue you?
They sure did. But speaking of sports, I recently worked in Joe Lewis's corner when he fought an exhibition fight in San Francisco.
Well, if you like fighting, what'd you think of the story we told tonight on John Payne, or for that matter, the other story we told on Bull Dawson?
I liked them. But, Bill, those were such amazing stories. Were they both according to fact?
Well, I'd say they were primarily legends, but I found them so interesting I thought everybody else would. Let me ask you a question, Rochester. Thanks to your being on the Benny program each week, you must know him pretty well. What kind of sports does he like?
Oh, he likes to attend boxing bouts, and there's a good reason. Years ago, he used to play in vaudeville. And back in the beginning, he wasn't doing very well. Until one day, he was stranded in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He had no job and no money. In fact, things looked so hopeless for Jack that he was just about ready to quit. That night, he met a prize fighter who made him promise not to quit, but to come to New York and give it one more try. Jack Benny did. And, of course, you know the rest. Jack became a great success, but he never forgot that prize fighter who saved his career. Incidentally, that prize fighter was Jack Dempsey.
Thank you so much. Good luck and good night, Eddie Rochester Anderson. And that's the 3-0 mark for tonight. We'll be back next Friday evening, same time, same stations, with another edition of the Colgate Shave Cream Sports Newsreel. Our guest next Friday evening will be the famous star of Hobby Lobby, Dave Ellman. So be sure and be with us our usual time next Friday evening. See you then. Till then, I'll be seeing you on the screen in the News of the Day newsreel at your favorite Lowe's or Associated Theaters. And now, until this next Friday night at this very same time, this is Bill Stern wishing you all a good night.
Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, is on his way. Bill Stern, the Colgate Shave Cream Man, had lots to say. He told you tales of sports heroes, the inside dope he really knows. So listen in next Friday night. Colgate.
Just a minute. Ladies, stop throwing away soap. For soap is fat. You see, fat is an important ingredient in the making of soap. So keep on saving waste fat. Keep on selling it to your butcher. He will pay you 4 cents a pound. Remember, where there's fat, there's soap. Eddie Rochester Anderson appeared on this program tonight, courtesy of the Club Zanzibar. The Bill Stern Show tonight came from New York City.
This is NBC, the National Broadcasting Company.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those stories. It reminds me of another story about a man, a broadcaster, a contemporary of Bill Stern's. He started his own show in 1951, and it ran until 2008. The man, Paul Harvey.
All through her wedding ceremony, Sadie knew she had forgotten something. After the ceremony, she remembered. She had not yet told her parents, or the boy to whom she was already engaged. Breaking her previous engagement was the easy part. Breaking the news to her parents was something else again, because Sadie knew that her mother and father would confront her with all the practical objections she did not want to hear. Ben was 33. Sadie was still a teenager. Ben was a traveling man. That would be difficult for a young, inexperienced bride. But Sadie was confident, and Ben had promised that she would accompany him wherever he went, and that she did. Sadie adapted quickly to Ben's traveling life, the hotels, the hard work, the late hours. During the first weeks, it was all a wonderful adventure. But as time went by, Sadie found herself contending with an unexpected adversary, jealousy. Because in each city, Sadie would answer the hotel room phone to hear a soft female voice asking for her husband. Invariably, it was one of Ben's old girlfriends who had heard that he was in town, but who had not yet heard that he was married. Ben promptly set each young lady straight, if gently, and the deliberate diplomacy with which he responded to those calls distressed Sadie. In fact, sometimes Ben actually forgot to mention why he could not see his former girlfriend that evening. An oversight, he explained. But what really bothered Sadie was that handsome Ben had had so many girlfriends. Ben assured her that his past was past, that Sadie was now the only lady in his life, and Sadie knew that was true. Yet at that sensitive time of unbridled emotions and intangible fears, Sadie began to panic each time the phone rang. So now you know how it happened. Now you know why Sadie, frustrated and frightened after the fourth call in the fourth city, why she impulsively, angrily reached up and scratched Ben's face with her fingernails. Almost at that instant, Sadie knew it was a childish thing to do, but somehow that petulant, impulsive gesture put everything in perspective. Embarrassed by her insecurity and the silly way she had expressed it, Sadie grew up a little, and newlywed love grew into lasting love, lasting 48 years. Looking back on that all-but-forgotten episode, it is difficult to imagine any otherwise significance for Sadie or Ben, much less for the rest of us, except that Ben's traveling profession was the vaudeville stage. And that night, attempting to hide the results of Sadie's rage, Ben walked out to greet his audience, discreetly covering his cheek with his hand. You know he was concealing fingernail scratches, but his audience did not, and they thought it amusing, as eventually would we all. Sadie, she joined Ben's act under the name Mary Livingston, and Ben, who concealed his wife's childish gesture with a gesture all his own, would be known, would be worldwide recognized by that gesture ever after. Ben Benjamin Kubelski? That's right, Jack Benny. To this day, impressionists evoke his image with a glance aside and a hand at the cheek, and you know why. Because now, you know the rest of the story.
Once upon a nightmare. Nate and Ben sat in a federal courtroom in New York City and listened in stupefied silence as the judge handed down his verdict. Guilty, the judge declared. Both Nate and Ben were guilty, and the sentence, a year and a day in the federal penitentiary. Both men would remember it always as the scariest moment of their lives, and yet how innocently the disaster had come upon them. It had all started with Nate's wife, Grace. As a young girl, Grace had been rather seriously burned. Her left arm bore the scars, and to conceal the disfigurement, she wore long-sleeved dresses and blouses. Her husband, Nate, had always wished that he could find just the right piece of jewelry, a wide and yet tasteful bracelet which might help Grace hide the scars and permit her to wear shorter sleeves. And then one day, Nate called his best friend, Ben. Guess what Nate said? I found the bracelet for Grace.
And then Nate told Ben how he had dinner with an acquaintance the night before, a fellow who had brought some jewelry back from overseas, and there was this one particularly wide diamond bracelet that Nate simply had to buy. So he wrote out a check on the spot for $1,800. Sounded like a bargain, Ben said, and Ben loved bargains. And then Ben asked if the fellow with the jewelry had anything less expensive to sell. Nate said there was a lovely pin for $350. And even though they were talking on the telephone, Nate could almost feel Ben's eyes light up, and so Ben bought the brooch for his wife. Now everybody's happy. Until several months later, when the process server showed up at the homes of Nate and Ben with subpoenas for them to appear in federal court on charges of smuggling. The man who had sold them the jewelry had not paid the proper duty when he had brought the jewelry into the country. And yes, that was smuggling. So Nate and Ben were in possession of smuggled property. Of course, they had not known it. But in this case, ignorance was no excuse. So here they are now, facing a considerable stretch in a federal penitentiary. Well, the first thing they did was hire the best criminal lawyer they could find, and the attorney advised them that their situation was serious. Probably there was no way to get them off, which meant only one thing, a plea bargain. They must plead guilty to a lesser charge and throw themselves on the mercy of the court, and that's just exactly what Nate and Ben did. They did plead guilty, and they were sentenced to 1 year plus in prison. And although the prison term was suspended, quote, during good behavior, the episode had proved otherwise costly. Tens of thousands of dollars in fines and attorney's fees. And worse yet, because of the unfavorable publicity, Nate lost the sponsor for his radio show. For Nathan Birnbaum and his wife Grace, you know by names now legendary in show business, George Burns and Gracie Allen. And George Burns' best friend, his equally unwitting partner in crime, attracted by the prospect of a $350 good deal that wound up costing him more than $60,000. George's thrifty friend, Benjamin Kubelski, who also got a suspended prison sentence in the bargain, you know as Jack Benny. Only now you know the rest of the story.